in light of the government's huge majority, landslide, before the election, I don't know if I heard the two words tax reform at all leave the mouth of anyone, but that's on the table now.
Yes.
Is that a fair – I don't know if I heard it that much.
No, it really wasn't. And I think it does highlight the fact that, politicians generally are very, very cautious about dealing with tax in election campaigns because it's just very, very hard, if not impossible, to have a sensible debate about tax policy even at the best of times. And the best of times is not during an election campaign.
Yeah.
And that's really sad because that's when we should be talking about this. But sadly, the standard of debate just isn't at that level. But is there a need to talk about tax and need to talk about how the government raises revenue? Yes, there is. So I applaud the Treasurer for at least starting the conversation.
Yeah, I might reach out to the Treasurer or my contacts in Canberra, and I don't know if he's actually willing to come out and sell what he wants to do yet to, the average bear like me, but I'm going to see if I can actually do an episode on what he wants to do and why. But one of the biggest things that we have seen is it's been put on the table, the GST increase. Now, for right or wrong, and the YouTube comments will obviously correct me. How dare I post a video on YouTube and not be corrected? For a long time, I've said we do need to increase the GST, probably increase welfare, and probably increase tax-free thresholds to kind of balance all that. And there's always a million reasons on why it won't work. But so the GST is currently at 10%. I'll get you to explain kind of the change to the GST, when it was introduced in the early 2000s, why they did that. But just so, if you've ever travelled to London or the UK, everyone, you'll get the receipt and it'll say VAT. So VAT is the value added tax, which is basically the GST. Here are some economies around the world, and I literally just typed this into chat while we were chatting, so it could be wrong. The problem with AI and ChatGPT, everyone, if you do not know your subject matter expert, it will lead. If you don't know your subject matter and you're not an expert, you can't rely on this stuff because it will trip you out because there's a lot of errors in it. Australia's 10%, so that's correct. It says here New Zealand's 15%, UK 20%, Canada, it's a province thing, but by 5 to 15%. Germany's 19%, France 20%, Italy 22%, Spain 21%, Netherlands 21%, Sweden 25%, and on it goes. So we are, as a GST, in the lower quartile, if you want to call it. As an economist, what's your view on increasing GST and making our society more of a, we pay tax on what we consume rather, because I think there's most of the heavy lifting on the federal budget is done by income tax. And we know we've got an older ageing population.
Yeah, look, I think firstly, I just don't see any great political appetite to do anything about and the way the GST was structured, with the revenue actually going to the states technically, to actually get a GST increase through would be extraordinarily difficult. And there's no magic number. And certainly I'm old enough to remember the debates about when the GST was introduced in the early 2000s. And one of the criticisms was wherever it's been introduced, it never stays at its initial rate. It always increases. So to counter that, John Howard and Peter Costello designed a system where it was almost impossible to increase. And so are there other things you can do on this tax side of things to maybe make the system more efficient? Now, this is not an ART view and it's not a Brian Parker view, but certainly when you talk to tax specialists about this, certainly things like land tax is something that tax theorists would say is actually a very, very efficient tax. It's much more efficient than stamp duty, for example. So there are things you can do. There's also some very sort of the sacred cows in Australia, for example, like negative gearing. To try and even limit that, let alone eliminate it, would be extraordinarily difficult. It wouldn't really make a hell of a lot of difference anyway. But I think more broadly, we need to have a debate about. And it's not just tax. It's also about, well, what do you want the government to actually do? What tasks do you want governments to do? And I think there is an education challenge here that politicians need to go through, where to tell people, look, this is what governments do for you. This is what the people have said that we want governments to do. We want the government to fund an adequate health and education system. We want the government to fund the NDIS. That is proven to be a valuable national asset for many very vulnerable people. So if you want the government to do all these things, and you want the government to buy submarines down the track, if people want that, well, how's it all going to be paid for? And so that means we need to ensure that our tax base is kind of robust enough to be able to pay for what we want governments to do longer term. Exactly what that looks like in terms of how much do we raise through the GST, how much do we raise through things like, new taxes like a land tax or income and corporate tax, is really an open question. I don't have a strong view on it because I'm a humble macroeconomist, not a tax specialist. But it is certainly a source of frustration that we've trained a generation of people that whenever you hear the words tax reform, people think, oh, good, how much am I going to get back?
Yes,
and that's not the right answer.
Yeah.
It's more about, well, who's going to pay for what we want governments to do and how they're going to pay for it.
Ken Henry did a really big tax review in 2010 called the Henry Tax Review. Yeah. In 2014, he described a future GST increase as inevitable, but it says here more recently in 2025, he reiterated that it's possible to achieve major tax reform without necessarily increasing the GST or extending its base. Such measures should not be off the table. So I think you're right there. As a society, it's always been tax, how much can I save?
Exactly.
Tax, how much can I get back?
Right.
And I just think, as you said, if we want all this stuff,
someone's got to pay for it.
The money's got to come from somewhere. And I think the biggest issue is, well, someone might say, well, we'll just grow the pie. Well, if we grow the pie, we're going to need more migration, and that's just going to screw housing prices more because there's going to be more people.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's a delicate balancing act. Yes, we need, fundamentally, the long-term growth in the economy is labour force growth plus productivity growth.
Yep.
That's the math. And so you get your labour force from somewhere. People who are you get it through the birth rate and you get it through migration. But at the same time, you need to have a strong housing policy to ensure that you're going to be building enough homes and apartments in the places where people want to live and work so that you can actually have a functioning and efficient society.
And also the infrastructure, which is pretty useless a lot of the time at the moment. You mentioned the P word. I wrote it down before, productivity. What do people mean and governments mean when it's like we need to get productivity up?
Yeah, if you look at Australia's, and productivity is basically output per unit of labour. It's technically it's output per hour worked.
Yeah. So we want everyone to do 1.5 widgets per person now.
Instead of one widget. That's right. Now, how do you do that? It's not increasing your hours work. That's not productivity. It's about working better and smarter and more efficiently. Now, increasing productivity, there's no magic wand and there's no one box you can tick that is going to increase productivity over the next 6 months. This is a longer-term strategy, a longer-term objective. And there's a whole litany of things you can do. You can do things in terms of business regulation. You can do things in terms of workplace, how we structure our workplaces. That's obviously a very controversial area, and it does vary a lot from industry to industry. Better utilisation of technology, a better education system, better skills training for the workforce. There's a whole list of things that people talk about when it comes to boosting productivity, all of which are going to make some contribution, but there is no one-size-fits-all solution to this. Fundamentally, if you look at the very, 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 very long term, typically Australia's productivity growth has averaged somewhere north of 1% per annum. It's not grown hardly at all in the last decade. Some industries have done considerably better than others. So you've things like communications and IT where you've seen quite strong productivity growth. But in other sectors, mining, construction, parts of manufacturing, you've seen productivity go backwards. there is no one size fits all, but there's a laundry list of things you could do to boost productivity over the longer term.
Hey, it's Glen here. Thank you so much for watching today's video. You made it to the end. Can I ask a favor? Can you hit that like button and maybe hit subscribe if you want to get notified when we release further videos just like this one, whether you watch the Money, Money, Money podcast or Retire Right. And remember, if you want to learn more about investing, I've got an investing book, The Quick Start Guide to Investing, and there's a link in the description to get your hands on a copy. Thank you so much. Bye.